All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and today's episode is a ripper. We talk about two US titans in the money finance game, Ben, and why they don't invest in property. And then we go through what we think about that decision. What else do we cover, Ben?
Yeah, Bryce, we've got a great question from a single mum who's asking the question about her daughter's savings. Should she put them in her offset and benefit them overall? So that's an interesting question that we'll unpack. And in What's Making Property News, Bryce, we've got a great little bit of data coming out of the RBA. What happens to the change in household size and how many extra properties do we need? We'll unpack that story later in the show.
Oh, stick around for that, folks. That's super insightful. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you. Every week I say the same thing, mate, but it's good to see you.
G'day, mate. Good to see you too. Are we talking footy this week? Is it sort of on the cards, off the cards? A couple of good wins.
I take it you're up and about and you want to talk about it.
Well, you know, we're now cementing our spot in the top 8, looking okay. Haven't lost for a while. We've had one draw in the middle of it. But
what I can tell you, mate, is if people are listening to this, by the time they listen to it, I will be on my way either in about 24 hours or, depending if they listen on Friday afternoon, on my way to the Freo versus Collingwood game over in Perth. So,
well, we've got to talk about it then. We have to talk about it.
I don't think we need to talk about the footy other than to say last time I went to the footy with you, Freo versus Collingwood, remember we were at the MCG.
Yes, we're at the G. Yeah,
I got a fresh kick across the head from that footy as we were out cooking. So I'm thinking, this is good. I got absolutely pasted, and then I get a whack in the head. And then I get home later that night, and I had to fly. I had to quickly go and fly home because my grandmother wasn't well. So that hasn't served me well in the past. So as I go to this game on Friday, I think I opened myself to a whole bunch of what's the word, mate? But
look, mate, you've got a chance.
I think we give ourselves a chance over there. Is all I'll say.
You should. Well, and have you been to Optus Stadium before?
I have. Yep.
Yeah, it's a cracking venue to watch footy, right?
Yeah.
So it's
well, I'm going in a box, Ben. I've been invited to go into a box. So
nice.
Just for the listeners, I've only been in a box sort of twice before. One was a rugby union match at Amy Stadium in Melbourne, and I could not have been more bored if I tried, Ben. It was so boring.
Well, not the union, just the game, not necessarily the sport. Or
no, I'm being honest. I don't love union. It's
fair enough.
We'll get some people writing in saying I've got no taste. I get it. And then I've done an AFL one before, and then I've been invited over there, so I'm excited about that. But we'll see. Let's talk about it next week, mate, to see if I've got any swagger or if I have to try and dodge your swagger. So
no drama.
We'll see how we go. Hey, you have got a picker webinar coming up, mate. The housing crisis setting the record straight, Ben.
Yeah, so I thought it's important, Bryce. Obviously, there's a lot of, vested interest groups out there sort of trying to get, fixes, short-term Band-Aid solutions to what is potentially a cyclical challenge, not so much a structural challenge in the property market. So, they're advocating and they're using old data and they're trying to basically get changes to legislation and the way in which the property market works. And I've always said there's unintended consequences. So I'm going to step through some of the data that they're claiming to be true, and then we'll challenge that, and then, some of the history that we know there. And that just means that all of our picker members will be very, very well informed, and hopefully they'll also spread that message out there. So more of the facts rather than the fiction will be shared out in the marketplace. And I think that will even up the debate a little, because it does feel a little bit one way at the moment.
Yeah, so Wednesday the 29th of May, Ben, at 7 p.m, Australian Eastern Standard Time. So adjust that for Adelaide and adjust that for Perth. And there will be a link, Ben, but that's still coming. right? So we'll
Well, no, there'll be a link. There'll be a link basically today as the show goes to air. There'll absolutely be a link, and ultimately it just means that that you still need to be a Picker member. So your $5 for a year or your $20 for 5 years is very welcome. And then you'll get access not only to this webinar, but also the back catalogue of great talent and educators that we've had to obviously, add value to our members. So check that out next Wednesday. If you can't make it, you'll get it on demand, but you can only get it on demand if you're a member. So please join up where you can.
Check it out, folks. Check it out next week. It will be a hell of a lot more organised than Ben and I regarding the link. So just so you know, the link will actually be in the show notes. So click on that. And you've got a new broker academy coming up, Ben, which you'll...
Yeah, I'm just travelling around to Sydney, Brisbane, and one here as well. So I've been asked to do a presentation to people who are thinking about joining the mortgage broking industry. So they might be just newbies into the industry or thinking about a career change. So I'll be obviously speaking about the journey that Empower Wealth has gone on and how we've built, one of Australia's top brokering businesses in the country, and, some of the tricks and tools and trades. So I'll be in Brisbane on the 4th of June, Melbourne presenting here on the 13th of June, and then on the 26th of June, I'll be in Sydney. And again, it's a free event. So if you're thinking about looking at a career change or wanting to add some skills, there's obviously a lot of other speakers on the day. It's a full day event. So the link will be in the show description if you want to get along to that. It's being run by The Advisor, which is the industry magazine for the broking industry. So check it out.
So, folks, that is, as Ben said, new to the industry. Anyone who's been in the industry for some time, Ben, and wants to collaborate on what it looks like to be an investment-savvy mortgage broker, or maybe talk about what it looks like to collaborate, you're always open to talking to those folks as well. So if anyone's
100%.
listening who is not new to brokerage, but you've been in the game for a little while and you want to collaborate on some bigger ideas on how you can help more people and become an investment-savvy mortgage broker, we'll encourage you to reach out to us as well, because Ben would well and truly love to have that conversation.
Hit me up on LinkedIn if so you can message me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, Ben, we love it.
LinkedIn.
So, there you go, folks. Want to collaborate with Ben on how to grow your mortgage broking business, and you've been in for a while, hit him up on LinkedIn. He'd love to hear from you. All right, my Mindset Minute today, Ben, is one that I've anticipated that you will be happy to be a participant in, Ben, but I came across an interview by Jimmy Carr, so a comedian, and I wasn't expecting to listen to this interview, but I was super surprised by how insightful it was. And one of the statements that Jimmy Carr said in this interview really pricked my attention. It said, the definition of entitlement. I thought, whew, Ben loves that. So, and this was regarding where you are now and where you want to be. So if you want to do something about it, that's ambition. But if you think where you are now and where you want to be is someone else's problem, that's entitlement. So, Ben, led me to sort of reflect that most people listening to this would put themselves, I reckon most people in our community would be in the ambitious category. They know where they are, they know where they want to be, and they're prepared to put the work in between, which is the definition of ambition there. For a lot of people that some of our listeners might know, might put themselves in the other category where they want someone else to do it for them, or it's someone else's problem. So, and that's when, when the government changes, when the policy changes, when something else changes, that largely goes around entitlement. But my question is for everyone to think about this week. Do you know someone who wants their lifestyle by design done via entitlement, Ben? I reckon a few people might know that. But what do you reckon, Ben? You've got tolerance for entitlement, don't you?
Look, there's always a need for society to have a safety net. There's a lot of people that are doing it tough, and the most vulnerable need to be looked after. But there is absolutely got to be a sense of drive and ambition to do for achievement, rather than sort of just thinking that it's someone else's responsibility to make my life happy for me. It all comes from the inside out, right? And so I'm a big proponent on this idea that, getting yourself into the right headspace, right mindset, and then going about trialing things, experimenting things and doing things. Because if it is to be, it's up to me. And ultimately, I'm the ultimate person in control of my life, and that should never change. And in terms of the way in which I respond and react to others, I should look internally first about my responses to those things, as opposed to blaming others or whatever, for the results that I get. So I'm a massive component to, if it is to be, it's up to me. I do also believe, because, in the work that we do, Bryce, that you don't have to do that work alone. There's obviously people out there that can help you in terms of mindset and, getting your headspace right and understanding yourself better. They're called psychologists, and I do recommend them, and I've used one myself, a long time ago, but very, very helpful. But in terms of same thing around money management, education, and all those type of things, lean on us, lean on the community. You don't have to do it alone, but ultimately the ultimate outcome and responsibility still rests on your shoulders.
It was one of those things, Ben, when I listened to that, I was actually listening to it with my wife, and I just did this, ooh. As soon as I heard it, I just, ooh. And I figured, that's landed, right? So, folks, if you are where you are now and where you want to be, if you want to do something about it, that's ambition. If you want it to make it someone else's problem, that's entitlement. Hey, what do you think about that definition? Something for you to ponder through the week. Hey, Q&A day today, Ben. We recently did our survey, TPC survey, and you and I and the STIG have gone through and analysed those results. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got overwhelmingly is that people still love the Q&A days, Ben. So that's exciting for us to know that. And it's the questions from the people. So, folks, in that vein, we certainly love for you to reach out to us. Now, today we've got a cross-section of ways that people have reached out to us. We've got our customer service centre has given us a question to Instagram, Ben, and also a question via SpeakPipe.
Awesome.
So there's a whole range of ways that people can reach out to us, but we get them. We've got a team that collates them, and we filter those based on how they add the most value to our community, Ben.
Love it.
And today's first one is from Anwar, and has a question regarding Morgan Housel and not being interested in investing in property, Ben. And here's how the question goes. Bryce, I know you're a big fan of Morgan Housel and advocate for his principles. Yes, that is true. I listened to a recent episode of The Diary of the CEO where Morgan was interviewed by Stephen Bartlett, which was a great episode. I've also watched that, and it was a great episode. However, Morgan repeatedly emphasized the fact that property was not a good investment and was completely against it. I hope you take the time to listen to this episode. Yes, I have, and give your thoughts on Morgan's comments and advice on property investment. This is one of two questions that we're going to tackle today, Ben, based on high-profile American commentators. So we're going to break it up into parts. But today we're going to, just for this one, we're going to tackle Morgan Housel's views on property investing, Ben. But good feedback. And if we feel comfortable with the philosophy of Morgan Housel, how do we reconcile the fact that he doesn't like property investment, Ben?
Oh, great question, Bryce. I mean, and I think what we love about what Morgan does is he tries to keep things simple. All right. I think he thinks deeply about certain topics and then synthesizes them into really simple principles that you might want to look at. That's what I loved about the book when I first read it, and obviously the narratives and the stories that he told, and that's why I passed it on. But
you passed it on to me. You sent me a note. I remember where I was when you flicked it to me, and I downloaded it straight away, and I listened to it voraciously from that point. So because of you, I listened to it.
Oh, that's all right. But yeah, so it's a good read, right? And obviously I'm reading sort of 2 to 3 books, every fortnight or thereabouts, in terms of always learning, always trying to see what's out there. Now, there is something that Morgan says, and what he's done is obviously got a very large audience that follows him based on those principles. And that's great, because I think a lot of what he talks about has got some real fundamental value, right? Spend less than you earn, blah, 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 all of those types of things. What's interesting also is that Morgan has a view on property based on what he sees. And if I was in America and I understood the American market of 300 odd million people, 300 plus odd million people, then I'm going to have different views in terms of the different marketplaces that I see around that market. So I've written some notes here around what that story tells me, right? Because I can tell you a story, and Bryce, I remember doing some presentations, not podcasts, some PowerPoint presentations in around 2009, 2010. Okay, this is just after the GFC, and I was talking about that on one of those particular presentations, that just on my credit card with a $5,000 Australian limit, because you also got to remember back then it was almost dollar parity for us, right? So I could buy three houses in Detroit for $5,000. I could buy 3 plots of land and 3 houses for $5,000, right? Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae had these mortgage in possession sales. You could go onto their website and you could basically buy these houses on your credit card. So I could have turned around and said to everyone, I got 40 houses in America, right? And I could have made some big concoction story up around that. Now, why is that? Well, the reason for that is that basically Detroit, Michigan, had collapsed as an economic powerhouse over the journey. You know, it was the manufacturing capital for cars of the world. You know, the US cars were built there. Life was good. It had enormous prosperity through that period of time. And then all of a sudden, manufacturing jobs and all that went offshore, and ultimately the city and the economic momentum in that town failed. And ultimately that shows up in values of property. Now, if you think right through the American Rust Belt, that story, happened through lots of those marketplaces. And if you think about America, and we watch enough of their shows and all that, there's lots of little towns and these little micro cities and all of that type of thing. And guess what? If I was talking to those 300 plus million people in the States, I too would be very careful about what I said about property and whether it's a good investment in that particular market. Because the reality is that in the short term, it's a story of demand and supply, right? So short-term price movements are a factor of demand and supply. Longer-term price judgment, i.e., this is a weighing machine versus a voting machine. The weighing, that ultimate weighing machine, which is where the real value is in economic activity. So if you study any city around the world or any place around the world where economic activity deteriorates and stagnates or goes in decline, then property prices will follow. And if you find any city in America where they're very prosperous in terms of economic activity and the big drivers that are driving that, and I know we can talk about the New Yorks and the LAs and the Los Angeleses and the San Franciscos, the Silicon Valleys. That's why those prices, are so high. But the one I want you to think about recently is Seattle, right? So Seattle is a classic case of where Amazon has set up headquarters, and Seattle's price has effectively outperformed the double of the American price in the marketplace, right, since about 2014. And that is effectively a case of Amazon basically building a behemoth business and having their headquarters in Seattle that has delivered an enormous amount of gross state product, and property prices have absolutely flown in that particular market, including inner city areas, but also some of the more, established suburbs around the city fringes and those elite and, sort of status areas. And that's a classic example of exactly what I talk about in terms of sustainable long-term growth. If you have economic activity that's growing, you have gross state product continuing to grow, then it's an expectation that property prices will continue to grow. So I don't disagree with what he's saying in terms of if I look at broadly across the US market, but I absolutely fundamentally understand the economic drivers, and then those economic drivers correlate to land value and they correlate to higher prices for housing over the long period of time.
Now, folks, if you're not familiar with who Morgan Housel is, he wrote a book called The Psychology of Money. And the subtitle of the book is, I find, the most impactful part of the book cover. It says Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed and Happiness, right? So if anyone's a serious student of investing and you haven't read that book, I think you need to put it to the top of your list. So we set the scene there. Now, to your point, Ben, he's a US-based commentator. So number one. Number two, we from the very beginning have had this rule that we've wanted to teach our community, that generalized commentary helps no one. So we've said a couple of times, if someone says, how's the Australian property market going? We go, we don't know. Which part do you mean? Or if someone says, how is the Victorian market going? The same answer. Don't know. Which part do you mean? because there's parts of the Victorian market that are going up, parts that are going sideways, and parts that are going down. So any generalised commentary about Victoria, Australia, Tasmania, Western Australia doesn't help anyone. So I think that's really important to really dial in on what Ben said. That if you are making commentary that is going to be heard across a market that has 330 million plus people in it, you better make sure that you cater to the lowest common denominator to help folks. Because there's people in America who've done really well with property, and there's people that haven't, and the disparity is quite vast. It's not like Australia where we have an incredible undersupply. We have an urbanisation that hangs out on the coast. No one wants to go inland on any scalable number. So the two markets are incredibly different. They have different tax policies. They have different conditions. Now, here's what I can tell you about listening to many, many interviews from Morgan Housel. Here's his asset allocation, Ben. Cash, his own house, index funds. That is it. Because his theory to successful investment is to lose your password to your accounts. So that ties into what we're talking about, Ben, which is buy, and then just optimize for as how long as you can stay, because he wants to maximize for endurance. And his parents modeled dollar cost averaging into index funds when he was growing up. So here's a guy that has a very basic foundation on investing. And I think most people could probably model it. Have some cash, buy your own house, which happens to be real estate, folks, and put your money into index funds, because we've had guests on our show. There's lots of the ability to beat the index in the share market over a long period of time for most people is something that's not possible. So therefore, he just says, let's keep doing it. Dollar cost. I'm going to buy it this month, no matter what the price. I'm going to buy it next month, no matter what the price. I'm going to buy it in 2 years and 3 months, no matter what the price. But here's his quote on X, Ben. Housing isn't a great investment, but for most people, it's the best investment they will ever make, because it's the only asset they will leave alone and let compound for 10, 20, 30 years. So that statement in itself is contradictory too, from someone who's got a very high profile, that it's not a great investment, but it's probably the best investment given that you will hold on to it for the long term. So our thoughts are this. We think that most investing success happens between your ears, and 95% of what comes out of Morgan's mouth we agree with. And even to his asset allocation, I think that's pretty good. But we live in a country that gives you an opportunity where your own principal place of residence is capital gains tax free. At this current point in time, there's no ongoing taxes that in order to hold that. And the idea of being able to leverage a tax system that allows you to have a short period of time that you lean on the tax system to help you accumulate until the point where you get to a break-even point, until you get to a point where you start paying tax. We think that the inefficiency that exists in the residential housing market, coupled with your ability to buy one or two, and don't forget, we're actually largely doing what Morgan Housel says, all of us in this country since the 90s, thanks to the Hawke and Keating government, where you are dollar cost averaging into your super each and every time you get paid. So mirroring his policy is pretty much what you're doing if you're doing nothing anyway, if you own your own home and have a bit of cash savings. But we obviously think that in our own experience and the success of property in this country suggests that you'd keep your mind open to adding other asset classes. Now, if you want to buy stocks, fine. If you want to buy art, crypto, whatever it is, we just happen to believe because of leverage and because of cash-on-cash return, the property is a useful and very good way for you to self-fund retirement. So, Ben, how did we go? Did we differentiate a guy who we both admire on something that can be confusing for our audience?
Well, I think it also reminds me, I really love the analogy of the dollar cost averaging in a super price. I think that's an important point, because that's completely separate to what they have over in the US, right? They have a 401, sort of tax system and pension types, but it's really weak in terms of that. So, your employee might have an investment system, and certainly an insurance and health policy attached to it. So we've just got two different markets. And, so it's not very easy to compare apples with apples. It's very much an apples and oranges story there. And so I think that that bodes well to the concept that we have. And remembering that Australia has 55 to almost 60% of its wealth stored in property. Now, that property wealth and the appreciation of those properties creates an enormous amount of economic activity, which is actually beneficial, broadly speaking, to the broader economy, in terms of even for owner-occupiers who eventually then downsize and have a lot of that money available for living throughout the course of their retirement years. So be careful what we wish for in terms of a more static market here. That would absolutely significantly impact the economic activity and the jobs prosperity, because there is absolutely a very, very strong linkage to lots of direct and indirect jobs that come off the property market, and housing people, and then feeding people, and then clothing people, and all of those other things that come off the back of that. So yeah, I think it's a fair message that Morgan's communicating to the American market. I think if I was living in America, I would be very focused on where I did my investments based on the economic prospects of the city and the town that I was looking to invest in. But like anyone, you can still make good. But generally speaking, Morgan's just being a little bit more cautious in that space.
So as a segue to the next question, which also talks about another high-profile American commentator, Ben, is a question from Jai that came via Instagram regarding rent vesting versus owning. Hey guys, I'd really like your opinion. I like Ramit Sethi. Seems like a legit guy. I know he was a rent vestor, but didn't realize he has no property in his investment portfolio. He makes some good points in this video. Sent a link, we'll summarize it in a sec, that would almost make one consider selling their properties and putting the proceeds into the stock market. So as an EW client with a property portfolio plan, I guess I'm looking for your argument to give someone like me reassurance we're on the right course. So great question, Jai, and hopefully there's been an entree to this question on the previous question. But again, we've got to be careful of American advice in the Australian market. It was, Harry S. Dent routinely comes over from America into Australia and talks about, hypes up some clickbait around how our market is going to collapse and crash, and has predicted 11 of the last 0 property crashes in this country. So he makes a comment in this video, Ben, of diversify risk. So when so much money is allocated to one asset, he considers that risky around his family home, right? But he also talks in this video about San Francisco, New York, and Los Angeles, right, which are very expensive cities. A bit like Sydney is a very, very expensive city. So I think there's some elements to what he says in the video, which is largely, to summarize it, Ben, for people for this podcast, it's largely saying, don't buy into the great American dream just because you think that's what you should do. He goes, run the numbers. He feels like the Association of Realtors created a propaganda campaign 100 years ago that said everyone should have the great American dream. We all focus on that and no one ever questions it. So that's the premise. Then he goes and says, you've got to run the numbers. And then he goes through the numbers, Ben, and he said, you've got to pay the taxes and you've got to do all the ongoing costs and you've got to do the interest. And he talks about the example where someone says, grandma bought it for $100,000, then she sold it for $900,000. So therefore she made $800,000. He's like, no, what about all the costs? That all the hidden costs, and he runs through all the hidden costs of owning property, which we acknowledge as well. So I guess the message that he says in the video, Ben, is just run the numbers. And lo and behold, we would agree, particularly if we were looking to buy in New York, or if we were looking to buy in San Francisco, or we were looking to buy in Los Angeles, big, expensive cities that require huge outlays. In those cities, it might make sense to rent vest. We've had Chris Gray on this podcast very early days. He's probably the highest profile rent vestor in this country. He thinks you should just rent and let your properties do the work. But he's got a very significant property portfolio. There's been times when I've rent vested across the journey as well too, Ben. So we're not saying rent vesting is a bad idea, but he is categorically putting a mast in the ground saying you don't need to do that. Rent somewhere else. It's in the video. He says it's 2.2 times more expensive to live in the same house than if you rent it. Sure, because you're carrying all the costs, right? But then he goes on to say there's, and I'll just rattle these off and then come to you for commentary, Ben.
Sure.
But he said, here's the questions he asks before he buys. Number one, am I holding it for 10 years or more? Number two, does it represent less than 28% of the gross income as the repayment? Number three, save 20% so that actually signals that you can save. Number four, be okay if the value of your house goes down. And number five, am I excited about buying, or do I just feel like I'm buying into a propaganda dream along the journey? So there's a bit to unpack there, Ben. But another very high-profile guest who has been on Tim Ferriss's podcast, has a book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He's got his own Netflix series. I've watched and listened to a bunch of his podcasts and his material, and I too rate him. But I just have the ability over the journey, Ben, of doing this for a long time to be able to decipher the differences between the markets that he's operating in and what works here in Australia.
Yeah, so let's try and be very fundamental about this particular story. We've got a set of rules, legislations, principles that the Australian property market operate under. And we treat investment property different than we treat owner-occupied property. In fact, we have a principal place of residence concession on one property that we own. So any value appreciation that we have on that property is capital gains tax free. That is not necessarily the case in the US. In the US, they also have tax deductibility. So if you borrow money to buy your principal home, you can also offset that against some of the taxes that you pay. So straight away, the mechanics and the rules of the market that's being formed are completely different, okay, in terms of that. Now, again, I would still say, even though the rules are different, overlay the economic activity story on those blocks of land in those highly desirable locations, and you get significant price appreciation, okay? And that's because as biological creatures, there's a couple of things that are important to us. What other people think of us is unfortunately very important to us, but we also we're social creatures, so we like to be around other people. And so social status, human interest, human behaviour stuff absolutely plays into price value in particular locations. And if we think about price and affordability and value, it comes off those most expensive properties and then trickles down. So ultimately, if you are buying in a middle suburb of a big city or in a small suburb of a small city, if that's not the most expensive or aspirational or most exclusive land or location, then you are ultimately a price taker. No matter what you think. And so timing that market is the most important thing, because the reality is that you are getting a ripple effect or a valuation effect that will be judged over decades, not necessarily just years. So you might be able to find an arbitrage in the market and move quickly in there for 2 or 3 years. But I can't find a case anywhere in the world where locations, if you're attached to a city and a central, gravity of an economic powerhouse, which is a CBD, then ultimately that land and purpose of use will almost always guarantee that the land values are more expensive. And so anything from there, you're absolutely a price taker, not a price maker. So it's really important to understand those principles when you are investing. And so I'm always saying to myself, the cities that I want to invest in or the locations that I want to invest in, what's first and foremost? Is this city or country, this state, territory, or whatever, is it going to be around in the next 50 years? Inside that 50 years, what's going to be its economic drivers? What's its competitive advantage to other towns or cities around the country? All right. And when you get to those mega cities, and this is what we've also got to remember, when you think about Melbourne and Sydney, they just fall outside of the top 100 cities by populations in the world. So in theory, they are mega cities, right? But there's only 9 cities in America that are bigger than Melbourne and Sydney. And a lot of people forget that. Okay, so if I was investing, and in my principles, I would absolutely be looking at investing in those bigger cities because I'm looking for that long-term economic story first and foremost. And then I'll take my price point in that particular location. And I know ultimately I will be judged by the economic growth that happens in that area, and I will get the trickle down unless I'm buying in the most exclusive locations. But as investors, we don't usually do that because the yields are no good. So I'm trying to get that balance right between capital growth and yield to keep me in the market. So I'm always ultimately a price taker. Even if I'm buying 5 kilometres, 7 kilometres from a CBD, I'm a price taker. Unless I'm buying something where I'm going to change the productive use of that land, and then effectively I'm turning apples into apple pie. So that just gives you some context in terms of the way in which I look at the world. And so, the idea of potentially rent vesting in those bigger cities, yeah, maybe. But I'd also say, and we've been consistent from day one on this podcast, I would like people to have some connection of property, if they can afford it, close to the Sydney area, in the Sydney Basin, or in the Melbourne metropolitan area more broadly. And if you're thinking in decades, that's going to be really good for you. But I also see up-and-coming cities that have got a lot of excellent fundamentals from an economic point of view and have competitive advantages associated with it. And they might have the next 10 or 20 years where they really define themselves as a city and the industries and the people that move there, and that ultimately bodes very, very well, like Seattle, as a good story, very, very well in terms of their future economic prosperity and the prosperity of the people who are there, and that ultimately shows up in the price of property.
Yeah, well said. Australia's got a superpower, and that's that we punch out of our weight division as an economic powerhouse based on the population base. And we've got lots of people who want to move here, so therefore we don't have enough houses. So if you just imagine anywhere in this country, particularly on the coastals, even the coastals that lead, as a hub and spoke out of the major capitals that exist now, when we double in population, imagine what it's like to not only live in those urban centres, but also those fringe that will become super cities. Brisbane and the Gold Coast will be one big super city in the future, even though you can see a lot of greenfields now. So what I'd say to you, Jai, is this. You are a property portfolio plan client. So you could go back and you could have a look at the surplus that you trap within your plan, and you've just decided to trap that surplus and put that towards established residential property. That's effectively what you've chosen to do. However, you could also grab that surplus that you trap, and you could actually do what these American commentators do, because out of interest, Ramit Sethi, even though it's spelled Sethi, I'll try and get it right, Ben, Sethi, him and Morgan Housel have the same philosophy. Morgan has a house, Ramit doesn't, but otherwise they hold some cash and they put it into index funds, right? So Jai, you could do the same. You could actually take your money and put those into index funds, and you get that choice. We think there's an opportunity in Australia that would, and we still feel very comfortably personally, we're still very comfortable professionally, that we would encourage our clients to still trap that surplus and put it into residential property. But you can mirror what they do. So that's number one. Number two, they have access to the biggest markets in the world. The biggest companies, the biggest cash flows, the biggest finance flows go into that market. So the fact that they're dollar cost averaging into those markets is a strategic advantage they have. So if you choose to do that, you'd probably want to mirror that as well. You'd probably want a dollar cost average into American indexes as well that match access to some of those biggest markets. But at the end of the day, what he is doing is he is chasing an arbitrage opportunity of, instead of having a mortgage, he is renting. And then the difference in that video, he says it's 2.2 times more expensive to buy than own in the American market. So he's taking that extra 1.2 and putting it into the market. So great. That's wonderful, right? So we're just saying put it into residential real estate, but you can put it wherever you like. And the last thing is he's rent vesting, but not in the traditional narrative that has become associated in this country. Because what we're saying with rent vesting is we will rent and then go and put money, that 1.2 difference, and we'll go and put it into other real estate. He's actually rent vesting into the stock market, right? So he's rent vesting and putting the difference into the market. But hopefully we've given you enough confidence there, Jai, that we haven't changed our own philosophies and liquidated everything to go and put it into markets. Do we have diversified portfolios? We've said that many times. Ben and I both have shares. We both have crypto. But the majority of our wealth is within our property portfolio and our business interests. So that will hopefully give you some understanding. And hopefully for anyone else who gets confused by other people, American authors, who we can respect and love, because we do, coming into our market and giving information that can feel contradictory and can help us feel a bit wobbly. And I think, to Jai's point, The last part of his question was, I'm looking for your argument to give someone like me reassurance we're on the right course, Ben. So I think that's important.
Yeah, it is. And look, I mean, we can only play by the rules in front of us. If the governments are stupid enough to change the rules, and that impacts the property market, there will be unintended consequences, right? We saw that when they banned negative gearing in 85 to 87. So our belief is that there will be no significant change to the market mechanisms and the rules in which we play by. And that will be actually a good news story for the prosperity of the country. If you collapse the property market in this country, oh my God, you are talking about not a recession, you're talking about a depression. So most Treasury people and the smart people behind the politicians know this. Property is technically too big to fail, but ultimately you still got to keep getting that economic engine moving. All right. And so we still need to make sure people are employed and there are jobs of the future. If all of those things remain true, then property is an incredibly safe and reliable, boring investment. And we've also been consistent on this story too. 1, 2, maybe 3 good properties held for the long term in concert with your superannuation is going to deliver you a very comfortable retirement. $2,000 a week, call it what you will in terms of what it's going to do for you. So we've never deviated from that story as well. We're not necessarily interested in, the person who's got the 14th or 15th or 16th property. If that's going to be you and if that's going to be, the image of the world that you need to share for your own self-worth and recognition, I think it's crazy. I don't think you'll ever find happiness there. But ultimately, that's not us. We're interested in helping as many people that we can across this great nation to buy a couple of properties in concert with their super and some share investing, and then just get about their life, right? We're not building the next property moguls. That's not our journey here. Our journey is about lifestyle by design and creating financial peace. And you can do that with a couple of properties and also with some sensible money management as part of that story.
So Ben, to sort of round that out, I think if we circle back to the first question with Morgan, we're advocating for cash. He has in his asset allocation cash. So when we build a plan, we have a basic household liquidity that we make sure our clients do not fall below, right? So tick, we mirror. Number 2, his thing is to have a house. We, in most cases, encourage our clients to live in their own home. Not always, but quite often, yes. And then the third thing is he puts it into index funds. That's where we differ. We say put it into a couple of investment properties because you are getting the equivalent of the index funds in your super because you are dollar cost averaging there as well. So there we go, folks. Hopefully that helps a little bit with if you too felt a little confused as Jai and Anwar have with some of these amazing American commentators. There's a ton of stuff on YouTube that you don't want to listen to. But they're 2 guys who you definitely do want to listen to. Hey, our third question is SpeakPipe today. It comes from Melinda. It's a remarkable story in a lot of ways, which we'll comment on shortly, but it's about their children's money and what's the best place to park the children's money. Let's have a little listen to the question now.
Hi there, Ben and Bryce. I was recommended your podcast a few months ago and my brain has been exploding with everything I've been learning. I really wish I'd known about you many years ago. I'm 53, single parent, and I have a smallish mortgage of about $130,000. It feels pretty big when it's just me. I've got very little emergency money or savings as I've been putting everything I can onto my mortgage. My house is worth maybe $600,000. I've started to change the way that I structure my accounts using your smart system, and I can already see a difference and I'm feeling better about my incoming and outgoing money. My question is around my offset account as I'm trying to grow it. I have a bank account for my 10-year-old daughter. I contribute to it each fortnight, and I have a brother who also pays in $50 a month. She also occasionally receives money for her birthday or Christmas, and I encourage her to put the majority of this gift money into her account. It has now nearly $14,500, and it's earning 4.75% interest, which I pay tax on. So my question is, should I put this into my offset account where it will be tax-free and working towards my debt and set up an IOU to pay her back once I'm in a better position financially? Or do I leave it because it's her money? She does know about it, my brother pays into it, and it has other family members' gift money in it. Maybe you've already answered this along the way. If so, can you please point me to that podcast so I can listen and learn? Thank you again for your willingness to share your knowledge and experience. I really do feel that you both have a lot of integrity and that you genuinely want to help people. And I thank you so much for that.
Ben, what a remarkable woman. What a remarkable woman she is.
Absolutely, totally remarkable. So yes, Melinda, that is, not giving up on that continued learning in terms of, your age and everything like that and what you're doing for your daughter. So, absolutely shout out to you. First class effort. And thank you very much for the kind words about, what Bryce and I are here to do. This is our meaning, this is our purpose. This is what we're here for in terms of trying to educate people around money, finance and property. And so you are right. We have actually done an episode on this, episode 116, all the way back when we were tackling the whole idea about, what should I do with, basically allowances or pocket money or whatever. And from a financial point of view, it does make sense to actually pool your money into the offset, because the offset we know is interest saving, not interest earning. So we don't have any tax payable on it. And it's obviously still a higher debt than the interest that we earn through an interest savings account. So I've got a beautiful little spreadsheet that we want to share with you. It's what we shared back in 2016. So we've built a spreadsheet exactly for this, where if you keep all the money, the household money in the offset account, which is benefiting the household, and it will benefit your daughter medium to longer term if that house is debt-free for you, and ultimately there will be some inheritances or legacy that comes off the back of that. But by way of example, what we do is you will set up a tracking, and you'll put the money in and then any money that comes out. And then you've also then got a cash projection story over that. So that'll adjust for the interest that you decide to provide for your daughter. So in my case for Jack and Harry, I use 6% as the interest that they earn, and they get a $15 a week allowance. And like yourself, they get money from their grandparents. They get money for birthdays and Christmas as well. And so we then just adjust for that. So I just use that money, pull all of that money, and then just run those spreadsheets for the boys. And it's so simple. It is so easy to do. And we've made the spreadsheet so easy to set up. So in the show description, you can click on the downloadable, and then you can set that up for you and your daughter. And that will then just track that going forward. And so to anyone else out there who's thinking of the same thing, that's the logic. Now, Bryce, there's obviously a behavioural thing that they might be missing out on here. So that's the other thing we want to talk to in terms of, that's why the projection and the impact on sort of saying, what if I spend that money, and you can then see what interest impact that's going to have. That's the behavioural stuff for us, because remember, money makes money. The compounding nature of money and interest on interest on interest, etc., is the power that we're trying to teach our children. So when we make decisions about wants and needs, we want them to sleep on those types of decisions. So they're not necessarily getting into this, consumer culture that we see out there where they need to have the brands, and the best example of all is putting a white T-shirt next to a white T-shirt that has a Nike swoosh on it. The Nike swoosh T-shirt's $49.95. The simple white T-shirt from I don't know, what's the guys who make the T-shirts these days down in Geelong?
Cotton On,
$12.95. Right, potentially the main T-shirt, but someone's put a screen print of a swoosh on the other one and put a Nike label on it, and all of a sudden it's worth 3 times or 4 times as much. So that's the consumer culture. That's the power of branding. And we want to be associated with that brand. So I get all of those types of things. But if we can teach our kids that the T-shirts does exactly the same thing in terms of it doesn't reduce the amount of sweat or whatever, it keeps us warm, it does the same basic functionality, that's where you can potentially make those significant savings, which over time will be really meaningful from a behavioural point of view, and then ultimately how much financial well-being your daughter and yourself is going to have.
Yeah, what a great question, Melinda. And I think in summary, if they're earning 4.75% interest on the money that then is taxable in your name, you find you can actually make it a win-win where you pay your daughter a little bit more than what she would have got in the high interest earning savings account, but it's still cheaper than the mortgage rate that you're paying. So it's a win for you, it's a win for your daughter, and it's also a double win given that you don't have to actually pay tax out of the income that you're getting on it as well. So on paper it makes sense, but here's where I think it starts, just with the conversation with your daughter first and foremost. To say, does she agree or does she not agree, right? Because I'm one of the blessed people that has found a life partner that I'm still in a relationship with, and my wife and I love doing life together, right? So we're blessed, right? But so therefore, I do not know what it's like to be a single parent. So what I'm about to say is a theory; it's not an experience, right? But my observation is this: for single parents, it's you're in it together. You and your children are in it together to navigate a situation where society says that you're at a disadvantage. You're at a gender pay gap disadvantage. You are at a superannuation disadvantage if your income is not as high, or if you've had to take time out to raise your children. And then there's also a one income gap disadvantage that you have, right? So compared to households that have two parents or two incomes, or a combination that puts them in a more stronger foundation. So with that in mind, it would feel like it's a joint game that you and your daughter need to play. So by getting the buy-in and seeing what that looks like, and to Ben's point, using the spreadsheet that I thoroughly recommend, you can still do all of the benefits of saving, because $14,500 is nothing to sneeze at. That is a significant amount of savings, which will also make an impact on your mortgage. To your point, at $130,000, which some people could say, geez, that's not much, and other people could say, wow, when it's you as 53 trying to do this on your own, that is a significant amount, which I agree with. So I think it all starts with buy-in, reminding your daughter that we're on a journey, and that journey is to get some security for you, which you've talked about here, which would help you, which means that then down the track, as she goes from 10 to 13 to 17, there's decisions and trade-offs, to Ben's point about the T-shirt, about the types of clothes and the car you want to drive and the opportunities that you get. So I think mathematically it makes total sense to bring it back into your offset account, right? But on the real life sense, I think by getting that buy-in and getting that journey with your daughter and reminding her we're in this together and this is why and this is how I think it can impact us, and we can see this and we can use it as a learning opportunity, which would give you the best chance in your circumstances of being a single parent to help you the most, Melinda. But as I said, I haven't experienced being a single parent, so everything I'm talking about is a theory. It's just the observations that I've seen through many years in practice and watching other people in my world who are single parents. And I think that would probably be a really, really great place for you to start on that. But I think overall your thinking is in the right page. I think you already knew the answer to your question anyway. And I think you're just getting confirmation here. But hopefully that helps. And let us know how you went with your daughter, and if you had that conversation, if she was happy to buy in and help you with that. Because I reckon not only is that going to help your household, I think it's going to help some other households who might be listening to this, because there's single dads as well as single mums out here, but overwhelmingly the majority of single mums are doing it harder than most people, given a couple of those gaps we talked about before. But good question, Ben.
Yeah, I think if your kids are in sort of the young teenage years, this is conversations around the dinner table around money, right? This is when we're forming some of those habits. So to Bryce's point, I love that we're just having that conversation first, right? And then understanding the benefits that all of us are going to get. So, if Melinda's daughter knows that she's going to get a little bit more interest on her money, but knows that she's helping out mum and helping them out together, and she can see that, make the invisible visible by using the spreadsheet, and you can sort of future pace some of those payments so you can see the interest. So I think all of those things. Now, there is, I think one thing she said in there that she's not aware of just how much is in there. Is that right? So that's in terms of
14,500.
Yeah, no. But does her daughter know that money's in there?
Oh, yeah, she goes, she does. My daughter does know about the money.
Oh, does know. Sorry. Okay, good. Because then the conversation's a lot easier because,
Yeah.
my boys don't know about how much they've got in certain accounts, right? They never listen to the pod, so that's all right. But they're a good example because the moment that they know that they've got some of that they didn't know they had, all of a sudden it's like, well, a pair of shoes or a good bike or whatever it might be is all of a sudden affordable. So that's what you've got to. So I think if she does know and she knows that that's building up, then, half the conversation's been had. So hopefully that's a good outcome for you, Melinda, in terms of that conversation.
Anwar, Jai and Melinda, thank you very much for your contribution to the questions today. There is a Start and Build course available to you. We'll reach out and let you know about that. Thank you for contributing. And again, folks, if you want to contribute, you've seen here, customer service, reach out, Ben, Instagram, reach out, SpeakPipe, reach out. We do find you and we want to hear what your questions are, which are really, really cool. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is... we're taking the boys overseas shortly, and one of the derailers to happiness for us when we're away is the fact that I'm a celiac, and so being able to navigate, when people who aren't celiacs, Ben, take it for granted that they can walk out of wherever they're going and just go, I'll buy that pastry, I'll buy that sandwich, or I'll have that drink or whatever. Whereas we have to be incredibly mindful about what goes into our mouth, and it can cause duress, because if you can't find something when your kids are hangry, that is right up there with poking your own eye out with a sharp stick, right? So what Andy's done is she has gone and found a card. We tried to go online to see if you could buy a card, right? We've done this before when we've been through Southeast Asia.
Yep.
But we've bought a card, and then she's got some ideas and put it together. So basically, it's a little card that's an intolerance alert. It says, we are all gluten-free, which means we cannot consume food or drinks with gluten-containing ingredients. The most common sources of gluten are wheat germ, barley, rye, oats, malt, soy sauce, spelt, and triticale, right, which is another grain. Safe ingredients are rice, corn, potatoes, polenta, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, poultry, and fish. And then stars, we put when prepared without flour or marinades containing gluten. The last bit of this, Ben, it says, we understand that it's best to avoid cross-contamination. However, since we are intolerant and not allergic, the three of them are, that's fine. Small instances like chips being cooked in the same oil are genuinely acceptable. That's a perfect explanation to any restaurant or any cafe or anything that we go in, right? So what she's done is gone onto ChatGPT, Ben, and got that exact card and turned that into Italian and into Greek. So then we can actually take those two cards and then just before ordering, hand that over to the person who'll be taking our order and give ourselves the best chance of making sure that I don't get glutened, but also making sure that we can spend a bit of time. So that's my life hack today for anyone who's like us, Ben, who is, we might put a link to this somehow if anyone could benefit from that, if they're celiac or not. But just a way that we're traveling to minimize the disruption and maximize the opportunity for us to get what we want. Because the amount of times, Ben, when I've looked at someone and I said, is that gluten-free? And they glaze over, and that's in English, let alone trying to do that in a translated country. It's very, very difficult. So there you go.
And just as a sort of potential value add to that, Bryce, the new ChatGPT translator, voice translator will also hopefully help in that conversation as well, where you can speak in English and it translates to any dialect across the world, and then hopefully they'll, if there is still a little confused look on their face, go to the conversational outcome where it automatically translate. But well done, yeah, that's
we do that a bit when where's the nearest bus station? Where are you? Where's this tourist attraction or whatever? But mate, I've got a younger son that just goes from 0 to hangry in the shortest time frame can exist. And then when I'm bloody blood sugar dropping as well at the same time, and everyone's trying to make, it is, I'm not joking, it is right up there with poking your own eye with the sharp stick. And some people go, yeah, great, first world problems for you, Bryce. But it is a real challenge for
Yeah,
us.
no, I appreciate
a lot
it.
of people don't have to think about. So this is the way that we've solved that.
Nah,
so
I like it.
so when we're in restaurants, mate, it's better to put a card under their nose rather than hand over your iPhone and say listen to the translation. But it's definitely a backup. What's making property news, mate?
Yeah, look, a couple of good stories that have come out over the last couple of weeks I just want to touch on. The first one was, pretty much the first speech from Sarah Hunter, who's the new assistant governor for the RBA in the economics area. And she did a talk on housing market cycles and fundamentals. Now, inside that talk, she tried to make a case that really monetary policy is a very blunt instrument generally in terms of slowing the economy down, but it's also not necessarily directly related to the property market, and it can't necessarily fix the structural challenges in the property market. And that the property market is going through a cyclical stage of strong population growth, et cetera, et cetera. So the bottom line, there's several really important takeaways out from that particular thing. One of them, which was really interesting, was the change in the housing size. So we've moved pretty much over the last decade or more from 2.8 people per household down to 2.5 people per household. Now, why is that meaningful, Bryce? That's incredibly meaningful because that correlates to 1.2 million properties that we need extra if the household size, in other words, the number of people who live in a dwelling, stays at 2.5 versus moves back to 2.8. So this is my point to government in terms of, and I said it recently on the pod, right, at the federal government pod, incentivise people to move into existing homes by ensuring that their principal place of residence exemption isn't exempt, as long as they're just charging a sort of an accommodation fee that's reasonable. That takes the pressure off the housing market in the short term, right? So these are the types of things that are solutions that are there. And obviously the other big takeaway from that is there is definitely going to be a significant shortage because the cost of building a home has gone up by 41% since 2019. So it's economically not viable for some of these developers to actually build on the land that they've got at the moment because of the cost base. And that basically means for the next 2 to 3 years, the property market's going to continue to be undersupplied, and that obviously bodes well for property prices in the short term. And we're seeing that in the markets where economic activity is going well and the settings are right, property prices are going higher. In the market that it's not right, which is Melbourne, where the settings are too, stringent for good economic activity, especially from an investor's point of view, they're sending their tens of billions of dollars elsewhere at the moment. Now, that market, remember, I think in the long term, not in the short term, that market will be a buying market. When others are fearful, that's ultimately when you want to be greedy. So that over the next couple of years, it'll be a static market, but there will be buying opportunities in the Melbourne market, and you'll get that full growth story once we get past this debt challenge and sort of regulatory challenge that we've got here in Victoria. The other story, Bryce, just quickly, was on was a release this week in regards to ASIC coming down on the hardship provisions that are being handed out by some of our lenders. So they went to, I think it was about 11 or 12 lenders and had a look at their situation about how they treat people on hardship. And their judgment was it's just too difficult. It's sort of a one-size-fits-all. There's lots of paperwork, and so a lot of consumers potentially pull out of the process. They quoted 35% of people drop out of the assessment process if they're trying to claim for hardship. And 40% of customers who receive assistance, this is the other concerning bit for me, is 40% of the customers who received assistance fell into arrears after the assistance period ended. Now, that's telling me about the behavioural element of basically how people are operating. And so they need to operate better at managing their money. So, if you go into hardship, it doesn't mean you can continually keep spending what you're spending. There's got to be some compromise and sacrifices you're going to need to make, or some effort that you're going to need to put in there in terms of getting a second job or doing whatever you possibly can. Now, I realise there will be fringe cases where health issues and so forth are a cause of that. And that's very hard to go out and get work if you're getting treated for cancer or whatever that may look like. But it just, bottom line is they want the banks to do better at sort of looking after hardship. And if anyone is experiencing hardship, always remember that you can ring. There's a national hotline you can ring for financial counselling assistance, and they will give you some guidance and advice in that particular space. So don't forget about that, and we'll put some details in the show description around that number that you can ring if you are feeling that your repayments are starting to get too much for you. We want you to talk to your lender because it's really important.
There's some very important issues that you've raised there, Ben. So well done. So folks, as Ben said, reach out if there's anything that you need to help in that. But again, thanks to our contributors today, Ben, Anwar, Jai, and Melinda for help making it a great show today. And mate, until as we close out episode 495, we are well and truly in the shadows of our 500th episode, Ben, and we have an incredible guest lined up for our 500th, which we think will help our community when it comes to lifestyle by design. So that's all we'll say at this point, Ben, other than to say we're excited about the prospect of having that conversation with our guest as that comes up as we near our 500th, Ben. But until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
See you next week, folks.